Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice podcast, your inside connection to outdoor legislation. From the Beltway to policy happening your way, we're covering it all. I'm your host, Fred Bird. Join us as we explore public land access, wildlife and fisheries management, Second Amendment rights, the triumphs that shape our nation, the sports we all love, and the stories that fuel our passion for the great outdoors. This is the Sportsman's Voice podcast. All right, folks, it is the Thursday edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast, the official podcast of the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. This week, we have two guests for you. We're talking suppressors, cans, silencers, whatever you want to call them. We're doing so quietly. I'm kidding. We're not going to be that quiet. But two great conversations here. Knox Williams from American Suppressor Association, ASA, CSF board member and CEO of Silencer Central, Brandon Maddox, joins us. We're going to talk about recent passage legislation in Vermont, making permanent the use of suppressors for hunting. Talk about more trends we're seeing around silencers, suppressors, what that means for you, who ASA is. Knox will talk a little bit more about his organization, then we'll jump over, talk to Brandon Maddox, learn about Silencer Central, the services they provide, where they're located. I mean, holy smokes, it's they're all over the place. You'll hear that story and how that came about from Brandon. And you know, he saw a problem, and as most successful business people do, they try to find a solution to that problem, and they end up with a successful business. And that's what we have here at Silencer Central. Brandon and I also explore some legislation sitting on the Hill that might turn that insanely high $200 tax stamp that you have to have on each one of your cans, and how that can parlay into conservation funding. We'll talk about that legislation, talk about the percentages, and then, you know, if that does stay, that could be a windfall for the sporting community. So all that and more. Sit back, relax, enjoy the show, folks. Let's go. Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another adventurous edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. This week, we are, this featured podcast, we're going silent, if I can be corny enough and cliche enough. We are talking suppressors, silencers, and we are joined now by a good friend of CSF, Knox Williams, President and Executive Director of American Suppressor Association. Knox, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for making the time.
Fred, thanks for having me on, man. Pleasure.
Yeah, we were talking before we came on air. Sessions are winding down. Things are starting to be a bit quiet, but the work never stops, especially here in the Northeast. And right out the gate, I think we can talk about a great victory in the state of Vermont with our EC member and one of the co-chairs of the Vermont Sportsmen's Caucus, Pat Brennan, was happy to relay to us, to you, the passage of House Bill 878, which in and of itself was kind of a miscellaneous judiciary bill, but in it removed the sunset on suppressors, hunting with suppressors there in Vermont. So now it's a real deal. It's there forever, right?
Yeah, that's the hope, man. Unless they take further action, it's there for good.
So there's, as I understand it, 8 remaining states in the country that do not allow for the hunting with suppressors: California, Hawaii, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, Mass, Rhode Island, and Delaware.
Connecticut is the only state where you can own a suppressor, but you can't hunt with it. Those 8 that you just listed off, obviously you can't hunt with it, but that's also because you can't possess them in the state.
Yeah. So Connecticut being the little wild card there. Okay, very good. Well, that's a good update.
Yeah, so Connecticut is the one state where you can own suppressors as a civilian, but you cannot use them to hunt. That is the final thorn in our side now that we've got things done in Vermont.
Okay. So obviously we need to do something in these other 8 states to get to the point where we can hunt with them. And going through this process, what have you found to be the best way to work through this, or, you know, the conversations had at the legislative level to get to the point where we can hunt with them? Is it a matter of somehow you can borrow someone's to hunt? It sounds dumb to say, but some of these states are wacky enough where I think that could be a thing. Like you could use it, but you can't own it. What's the whole process
Well, no,
like?
so I mean, the first hurdle that we've got to clear is allowing civilians to merely possess them in the state. And some of these remaining states, even with an
Okay.
SOT, which is a special occupational tax, which is basically an add-on to a federal firearms license. Many of the states where they're currently prohibited for civilian ownership, you can't even have them if you have an FFL and SOT. Some of them you can't even have them if you're law enforcement. And I know that in several of those states, law enforcement have them anyways, but technically they're breaking the law, similar to how they broke the law when they passed the magazine capacity limits in New York State, and they rushed that through the legislature after one event and limited the number, but didn't have a carve out for law enforcement. So immediately, every law enforcement officer in the state was inadvertently committing felonies based on the new law. They quickly rushed through a fix for that, but there are several states where law enforcement officers have suppressors, and it is technically against the law. The biggest strategy for us at this point, we think the successful way to go about it is through litigation. You look at the political makeup of these states, right? Like very few of them have pro-gun governors. Almost all of them have Democratic and no, not even Democrat, because we've had a lot of Democrats carry a lot of water for us on suppressor issues, especially in the Northeast, but really more so anti-gun supermajorities. So it makes it very difficult to see any clear path towards success at the legislative level. Hence, shifting focus towards litigation, like our lawsuit that we're working with Silencer Shop in Illinois, challenging the constitutionality of the state ban on suppressors, saying it's a violation of the Second Amendment, which is something that the Bruin decision in New York really opened up for us. Um, so, looking to
Okay.
we're in the process of raising dollars so that we can file additional lawsuits, likely in New Jersey and California. Those are the two targets that we've got so that we can have three concurrent lawsuits all suing on the same thing. Obviously, we'd like to win those lawsuits, but even if we can create a split court, that would likely increase our chances of getting a successful petition up to the Supreme Court to ultimately decide the case, which basically centers around, does the Second Amendment apply to suppressors, which we think it should.
And especially since they're classified as a firearm, right? So, I mean, by definition, it should. I guess the thing for me personally, and again, I'm always learning, I just don't understand the hang up with this add-on equipment. It makes no sense in my mind why these things are vilified, why they're put under such scrutiny where they they're very inanimate by themselves. They do absolutely nothing except baffle the sound and lower recoil. Like there's all these benefits. Is it a function of people in policy making positions just watch too much TV and they think we're all going to turn into mobsters? Like I can't reconcile it in my head. It seems like it's this boogeyman for no reason.
Yeah, for a lot of people, it's just basic misunderstanding. They've only seen it through Hollywood. They think it's only mobsters and criminals and CIA assassins that would use these things. That's obviously not the case, especially
Mm.
now that transfer times are so fast. You're seeing, 60, 70, 80,000 suppressors being transferred into civilian hands every month, which is wild, right? That growth curve is hitting exponential. And it's something that's been growing over the past, a decade plus that we've been working the issue at a very, very rapid and sustained pace. But you look at the political side, and much of it is willful ignorance.
Mhm.
It's not so much these things wouldn't help protect people's hearing and make shooting a safer and more enjoyable experience. It's we hate guns, so we don't want anybody to have anything gun related. That's really kind of the epicenter. And I've got a story from Illinois back in about 2015. We were working that state very hard on the legislative front. We actually almost got a bill to the governor, Governor Rauner at the time. It passed through the House. The Speaker of the House, who had never taken a pro-gun vote in his 30 plus year tenure, he actually voted for the bill. And it was
Hmm.
standalone. And we got screwed over by the Senate president. He gave us a handshake deal telling us that he send it to the floor when we asked. We asked multiple times and he never put it on. But nonetheless, we had a meeting with one of the several of the Congressional Sportsmen Caucus like state members there. Uh, uh, Representative Phelps was kind of the ringleader at the time, and he was, I believe, part of the National Executive Council at the time. So we had a sit-down meeting with him, several other Democratic legislators, a couple Republican legislators, and it was us and I believe it was the Brady Campaign Against Handgun Violence lobbyist, which was kind of the chief anti-gun lobbyist in the state at the time. And we're kind of debating back and forth the merits of suppressors. And in the middle of the meeting, no BS, she looks at everybody and says, "You know what? I can't voice why we oppose suppressors, but they have to do with guns, so we don't like." And I just looked at the legislators and was like, well, that's all you need to know. I can't argue with that, right? I can't
Mhm.
present any facts that's going to change this. This is like debating religion with someone who's, absolutely dogmatic, fervent believer in their religion. We're going to go nowhere. And that's the point where which we are with a lot of these anti-gun legislatures and legislators. It's really, you know, almost dogmatic.
It's an automatic response to something. It's like a pistol grip, man. I had a conversation with a legislator in Rhode Island recently at a caucus event, and fit to be tied about accoutrement, and just was so committed to this idea that a pistol grip with a collapsible stock was going to end the world and make that particular platform far more efficient than if I could hold it without a pistol grip. And it was very strange to like try to have a very rational and reasoned conversation about, you understand if we change the furniture on this, it does nothing to affect the proficiency or the max effective range of this weapon system. It's all superficial. And likewise here, what you're saying, like all the health benefits, and I've heard people say, "Well, that's just the gun lobby spinning it." Well, what are you spinning it from? Like literally, these are the benefits. It's not hyperbole. It's a far more enjoyable shooting experience. I mean, in some cases, you don't even have to wear ear pro. Um, Not recommending that, but in some of the platforms, especially like some of the 9 mil platform, very quiet. Um, Drops that recoil. So I mean, there's nothing but upside, and again, I just can't get to a place where people who are in a position of power and ability to create change just dig their heels in, and admittedly so in Illinois. I have no reason other than no.
Yeah. Yeah, and you wanna talk about spinning it, the real spin doctors are the anti-gun lobbyists. You look at specifically Josh Sugarman from the Violence Policy Center, uh, and trace back the history of kind of the gun control movement. Well, in the '80s, it was all about we need to ban handguns, these Saturday night specials make everything dangerous, and that's what criminals are using, and it's true. The overwhelming majority of firearms violence comes from handgun use. You look at the stats, and it's 300 to 500 people per year are killed using any type of long gun. That's rifles and shotguns, anything that's considered a long gun. And you juxtapose that with the what 10 to 15,000 or so homicides, taking suicide out of it, that are perpetrated with handguns. And I'm not saying we should ban handguns, but if you want to actually say we want to have an impact on gun violence and remove the hardware that is, the largest contributing factor to gun violence, it would make sense why you would go after handguns. Well, they did that in the '80s. That was, through the birth of the Brady Handgun Violence Center. Or Brady Campaign Against Handgun Violence. Um, that was their number one target. Then Josh Sugarman comes in and he realized that like that was a losing political battle. So we are going to intentionally mislead the public to believe that semi-automatic firearms, any sort of black gun, is equivalent to a military style machine gun. And he very intentionally, and it's pretty well documented, came out and said, let's mislead the public. And that's what they've done. And that's what we're currently fighting. We've been fighting it, starting with the assault weapons ban in 1994. Then when that sunset in 2004, ever since then, that's the battle that we've been fighting as a community. And it's something where you got to look at it and say, wow, like you did a pretty good job of misleading the masses. And this is where, we need to figure out how we can creatively counteract that. And obviously you've got, basically half the country on our side and basically half the country on their side. And it's come to a point where, firearms support has become such a partisan issue. And that's where I think CSF really plays such a pivotal role in all this. We need to get back to a point where this is not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue, where this is just an
Right.
American thing, because
Same
like it
here.
or not, we are fighting to protect their Second Amendment rights as much as we are to protect our own. And that's something that I think
Yep.
gets lost in the discourse is, this is a civil right for every American citizen. As long as you're a law abiding citizen, this is your right too. And, to be able to break through the intentional misconceptions that the anti-gunners have put out, I think that's going to be kind of the critical thing for us at large.
It's very Edward Bernays-esque, the tale you just told there. And, it, you look at some of the most Machiavellian marketing campaigns that he came up with. And one that comes to mind was Torches of Freedom, when it related to advertising cigarette smoking to women during the war, the Second World War, I believe it was. And obviously, in society, it was looked down upon, and they had a whole other way of thinking back then. But he found a way to spin that thing into a patriotic campaign, put cigarettes in the mouths of women, and now they just doubled the intake, the profitability of cigarette smoking and cigarette sales, which obviously fast forward all these years, we all know was BS. In very much the same way as this marketing campaign, as I can tell you as a veteran myself, uh, the weapon systems I'm allowed to have as a regular firearm owner are not the same of the firearm platforms I used when I was in the military and overseas in wartime contingencies and such. And I'm even dating myself because that was the early part. Never mind the advances they've made now in theater. So, um, and it strikes me why policymakers are unwilling to listen to testimony like that from people like me, from people that have had these systems in their hands and will tell you this is not the same. There's nothing the same about it. And also from my experience, I can tell you I would have loved to have a can on the end of some of my firing line experiences because that stuff's loud, man, no matter what ear pro I had in there. And going from an A2, what the hell was it? I'm dating myself. The old style M16, and then running some of the bigger things, M60 to the 240 Bravo, and running 203 grenade launchers off that. That stuff is loud. You're not gonna do anything about the 203, but my point being, like, if we had this then, I would have, obviously advocating for it now on the civilian side. Like, I don't want my kids to go out. Like, look, per case in point, I ruined my daughter. At 5 years old, I ruined her because I didn't take into consideration. I never trained kids what the report would be like on a 20 gauge shotgun. Me thinking, oh, this is easy. It's light, low impact, low, just put some ear muffs on her, no big deal. And it ruined her. She didn't want to go near an air gun. No matter how I tried to sell her on it, this is nothing compared to what you did. And she kind of has that kind of post traumatic when it comes to firearms. Now, if I had a tool in my toolbox to put something on there and lessen that experience, it probably would have been a better deal. Anyway, all that to say, there's applicability and use for everybody, and it's not even close to what manufactured and spun from these marketing
Yeah,
campaigns.
no, not even close. You look at like the military, and again, to start, thank you for your service. Uh, the number one and number two largest disability claims for the VA are usually tinnitus and noise-induced hearing loss. All of that is a direct result of small arms fire, but a tremendous amount of it is. You still got other loud things like, jets and Humvees and tanks and explosions and, war is loud. But one thing that you can control is the report of a handheld firearm. And that's something that we as an organization have supported for years is system-wide adoption of suppressors for the military, knowing that we're sending our warfighters and specifically the door kickers into combat ill-equipped to come back out without permanent disabilities. And noise induced hearing loss and tinnitus are two things that you can prevent with the proper equipment. So, from our perspective, getting warfighters access to suppressors in duty and law enforcement officers as well, that is critical. Also critical is allowing civilians to use it because gunshots are loud. They're loud enough that for most of your hunting type calibers, uh, any time that you expose your ears to unsuppressed gunfire without adequate hearing protection, you are permanently damaging your hearing. It's not a question of if, it's rather a question of to what extent. And suppressor is the
Mhm.
only thing that controls it at the source. We are not saying that you shouldn't wear, traditional hearing protection devices like earplugs and earmuffs. You absolutely should. Those should be used in conjunction with suppressors. In much the same way that, getting into a car, you should buckle up your seatbelt and have airbags. You don't want to say, well, I've got airbags. I'll be fine. I don't need to buckle. Well, that's a great way to go through your windshield or break, right? Suppressors are just one tool in the toolkit that allow hunters and recreational shooters and anyone exercising their Second Amendment right to exercise that right without jeopardizing unnecessarily one of their five senses. And that's really it's as simple as that. People love to say that,
Amen.
we're trying to spin the facts. Well, the facts are on our side. It's scientifically proven that suppressors will reduce the noise of a gunshot and that exposure to that reduced noise source is less dangerous than to a louder one. So I think it's that simple.
Yeah, and I think another, and I'm not even gonna say selling point, just another fact. Uh, Here where I live in New England, it's pretty congested. There's a lot of people in southern New Hampshire now because of our funding system. Some of that money goes towards making sure that there's public ranges. That's part of the deal. And whether they're public or private, the folks around here, they tend not to like the noise, especially on the weekend when family around, whatever it is, they just don't want to hear the report of a firearm. Well, holy smokes, if most of your people could go out there with cans on the end of their rigs, um, probably make it more hospitable and be better neighbors about it too. And I think specifically about these remaining states that don't allow it. And obviously there's other uh, you know, barriers for entry here and cost of the stamp, the wait times, even though you already alluded to it, they're significantly down. When I worked at SIG during the COVID years, I got to experience some of that and see firsthand, people come in, go through the whole system and see in 9, 10 months. And they just sit up on the shelf inside the SIG Academy Pro Shop there and collect dust. And then all of a sudden, some random fella comes back in with a receipt. It's like, hey, I'm ready to go. Like, oh, good to see you again. And it's just crazy, right? So some people just get turned away on that alone. Like, I'm going to tie up all this money in a piece of equipment that I can't have for an extended period of time. That sucks.
Yeah, 100%. It's so unnecessary. You shouldn't have to pay a tax to be able to protect your hearing. You also shouldn't have to wait that long. And to ATF's credit, they have done a tremendous job of decreasing those wait times. Now, we're not going to be happy until you can walk in, buy it, and walk out with it.
Right.
That is the end goal, and we will continue to work alongside CSF until we meet that goal. But it is far better. We're talking days and weeks instead of months and years, and that's a great spot to be for now.
So where are we then, I guess, on if we get a crystal ball out, is there one state or another that stands out to you where you think that we could get closer to, or because this is a federally controlled issue that it is what it is until we can move those rocks there? As far as getting a piece of, a suppressor in your hand, to your point of walking out of the
Getting
door with
quicker.
that's
So that is the faster transfer times are all federal. So ATF controls every step of the process from manufacture to sale to either distribution or direct to dealers, and then from dealer to consumer. Each step of those requires its own ATF form, whether it's a Form 1, Form 2, Form 3, Form 4, Form 5. All that has different applications. That all comes directly from ATF and the federal government. Now, there are some things that we're working on to try and improve that. We are working directly with ATF to try and improve things like how do we clear the bottleneck that is the FBI background check? And something that a lot of people don't know is that when you file a Form 4, which is the tax paid application to buy any National Firearms Act item, so that's suppressor, machine gun, short barrel rifle, short barrel shotgun, any other weapon, uh, that all gets sent to the ATF, whether you do it through paper or electronically. And the e-form system is by far the best and most efficient way to purchase a suppressor right now. But so you submit that application to ATF, they take your information and they send it directly to the FBI. The FBI conducts a NICS check, which is a National Instant Criminal Background Check System check. That's the exact same check that they run at a gun store when you fill out a Form 4473 and you buy
Uh-huh.
a Title I firearm. So think like a rifle, a pistol, a shotgun. It's the exact same background check for those items as it is for a NFA item. So it's not some super secret, crazy background check. They're not running all sorts of additional things and matching with different indices. It's all the same thing. The only difference right now is that when you buy a Title I gun, so a rifle or pistol or shotgun, because of the Brady Act that set up the NICS system, they are required to approve or deny you within 3 business days of that application being received. And if after 3 business days they have not approved or denied you and you're still in a pending state, the dealer has discretion to allow that transfer to proceed. So the FBI has a massive incentive to say, we need to clear these all out within that 3 business day window. With NFA items, they do not have that same statutory mandate. So they can basically say, well, if you hit a delayed status, which is about 30% of people, so 70% of people, when ATF sends in your application to get that next check, about 70% of those get cleared immediately. So it's called an auto proceed. We checked your background. You don't have the same phonetic name as someone who has committed a crime, or we know that it's not you, so you're good to go. Those 30% of people are then in what's called a pending state. And for a lot of them, when you buy a rifle, pistol, shotgun, it seems almost instantaneous. So they can clear that within a matter of seconds. And to the consumer, it's instant, but on the back end, it's technically not instant. So they're running things like, okay, well, this person, I'll use my brother or general counsel as an example. His name's Michael Williams. Well, is there a felon named Michael Williams? Yes. Okay, well, is this person that felon named Michael Williams? And they're running through some checks. If you include your social security number, that expedites the check. And that usually can be something that clears it immediately. But they
Mhm.
just run through the system and clear those people out. That's another 10 or so percent of the people that get cleared out. So you've got about 20 or so percent of people that hit a true delayed status, which then goes to a person to help clear up and figure out, is this person a prohibited person or not? Usually they're able to clear it out within a matter of minutes. So it again, it's not quite instant, but it seems very quick. But with NFA items, they're putting them in a pile and they're saying, we'll get to them when we decide to get. So that's one of the things that we're working with ATF to try and overcome is how do we clear that FBI hurdle? And that's something obviously that we'd love statute to fix, but you know as well as anybody
Mhm.
else in this current political environment, even must-pass bills aren't passing. So the likelihood of anything going through Congress at the moment, and especially getting signed by President Biden right now, that's slim to none, right? It's not realistic. It's a good long-term goal, but it's not realistic. Something that we are looking towards in a potential future administration, if we get a pro-gun administration in the White House, is what can we affect through regulatory reform? And there's a tremendous amount that you can do because at the end of the day, ATF reports to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice reports to the Attorney General. And guess who the Attorney General reports to? United States. So all federal executive branch policy rolls through the White House, and there's a tremendous amount that can be done through regulatory reform there. And that is one of our biggest targets for the short term, obviously contingent upon the outcome of the elections in November.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it seems like that a lot of things can be put in that box
Absolutely.
there. And so wait until 2025 for sure to see what we can start doing. In telling all of that in that process, going back to my firsthand, on the other side of the counter and facilitating transfers, it always struck me odd, again, with these seemingly inanimate objects that can't do anything other than make things quiet. You sit there and do a multiple transfer, right? And I could transfer 4, 5, 6 guns at a time, and we go through the process and it'd be good. And like, okay, we're going through all that. You got to take a couple extra steps when you're doing a multi transfer, but no, nothing that's prohibiting anybody longer than 5 minutes before walking out, as long as they got an all clear, good to go. And I just would be like, why can't we just throw this can on here? Because I'm already doing this work. Like, just do it. It's serialized. It's classified as a firearm. Just include it with the multi, and obviously for the reasons you just espoused is why it is, and that's all the more reason why we need to get it fixed.
When you look back at the history of why suppressors and why the National Firearms Act exists in the first place, it's all it was an attempt by FDR and his Attorney General Homer Cummings to try and ban guns. They knew that they didn't have the authority to do so constitutionally, so they got creative and they said,
Mhm.
"Well, what's the next best thing that we can do? We can tax." And so that's why you can't currently add them on to a 4473. It's because they have to go through the tax scheme. They have to get taxed and they have to get registered. And you have to have proof that you've paid the
Uh,
tax. And that's really all that it is. At this point, 90-year holdover on an attempt to ban all these items. And the interesting thing about suppressors is that's the only thing that's included in the National Firearms Act that wasn't part of the congressional debate. So nobody really knows exactly why they were included in the first place. We know that the National Firearms Act, was really targeting machine guns. Think kind of Al Capone era, prohibition, sort
uh-huh.
of gangland violence. That was the the thought of the day in the 30s. But with suppressors, the original draft of the National Firearms Act included suppressors only when they're used on handguns. And take that one step back further, the original National Firearms Act also included handguns as a standalone. So they were going to have all pistols put in the National Firearms Act. Imagine if you had to pay a $200 tax to buy a pistol and go through the NFA process. We'd be living in a much different world. And the National Rifle Association at the time pushed back on the pistols. They got that removed. But when they removed pistols, they didn't finish the job and remove suppressors or remove the restrictions on short barrel rifles and short barrel shotguns. Think about it logically. SBR and SBS restrictions make no sense when you can have a rifle
No,
and you can have a pistol, but you can have a rifle that's
right.
short and you can't have a shotgun that's short. Now, the intent
Yeah.
originally was they didn't want people to be able to buy a long gun and saw off the barrel and saw off the stock and make it into a pistol, which, I disagree with that in general, the regulation on it, but it makes sense in that context. It makes no sense now, and it was poor legislative drafting on part of the groups that were advocating against the National Firearms Act.
And what a ridiculous thing, recent in the last handful of years, and the attempts to outlaw a piece of plastic brace. Again, another inanimate object that would do nothing more than how it just provides support. I mean, you have it anyway as SBR. I mean, I can think of all these different variants that I've had the pleasure of doing a little fanfire with, and with or without it, thing shoots, and with or without it, I can be accurate. So I'm again, uh, weird stuff, man. It's just as someone that largely for me and other people listening to this that hear this, and you're looking from the outside in, you're not dealing with this very nuanced and very specific set of details in this world. Yeah, people just sit here scratching your head like I just don't get it. But in the same respect, for whatever reason, people just accept it. And, our work with your organization and working together, and then at least going to the state legislatures, and then at the federal level, working with the caucus there, you hope some of that starts to trickle out, or at least start mitigating some of the foolishness through advocacy and education. What, I guess at the federal level, what has your experience been with working with our federal team and in recent years, and in advancing some good policy or thwarting some
Yeah,
bad
man,
stuff?
honestly, they're fantastic. And, Taylor, Jeff, Brent, those guys, like, specifically with Brent Miller, man, I cut my teeth with that dude, right? We came up and we hit it hard and we won in a lot of states. And you look at the map where suppressors were back in 2011 when we formed and where it is today, and it's almost
Okay.
unrecognizable. And a lot of it has to do specifically with Brent just being an absolute, well, I don't want to cuss, but a BA, man. Like so much fun to work with. I learned so much going to these different legislatures, developing relationships with legislators all over the Northeast, and winning, man. we won suppressor hunting in New Hampshire, won suppressor hunting in Maine. We won ownership in 2015 in Vermont. We won hunting 2 years ago. And then finally, we closed the door on that state by winning, getting rid of the sunset provision, which was such a weird and unnecessary inclusion on the hunting bill 2 years ago. I don't know if you know the backstory on that, but the anti-gunners got enough legislators spun up on the idea that allowing the use of suppressors while hunting might negatively impact domestic violence. So we need to have a sunset to make sure that that doesn't happen. And we're just scratching our heads like, I don't know how in any world you can logically connect those dots. They are completely irrelevant and separate, but nonetheless, we're going to take that deal because that gets us hunting for at least a
Yeah.
small window. And we know that nothing bad is going to happen, and nothing bad did happen. Hence, Representative Brennan being able to get that. But also shout out to him, man. He has been working with us for about a dozen or so years, and he has really led the charge. But legislators like Representative Brennan, Jeff Goley in New Hampshire, Steve Wood out in Maine. I mean, the amount of water that they carried for us is truly unbelievable, and those guys really deserve to go down in the history books for fighting for the rights of the citizens of their states.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure, and
yeah,
continue to do so.
yeah,
As we cover this in our Sportsman's Voice EPUB weekly offering that comes out, this is being covered for the Northeast, and I just give you a quick quote from Representative Brennan that's included in that article. I'm very proud to announce the passing of House 878, a miscellaneous judiciary bill. The bill includes removal of a sunset on hunting with suppressors, thus codifying into permanent law. It has been a long but rewarding process over 9 years, and I am honored to have been a part of it. The health and hearing benefits of this bill will be realized for years to come. Representative Pat Brennan contributing to that article. So yeah, it's something like that. There is a big deal for him, and certainly you mentioned Brent Miller too, our my boss, and our vice president of policy. He was when that broke, when you guys dropped that press release. Yeah, he was pretty stoked to see that come across the old screen there, and we connected on that pretty
yeah, man.
quick. So yeah, it's good. And in these long marathon hauls, man, I mean, some people in our space, people come and go all the time. Like, you'd like to think you could get some institutional continuity and people would hang around for 10, 15, 20 years, retire. But the God's honest truth is it doesn't happen like that anymore. So to have a victory like this, that's almost a decade long, um, man, it speaks to a lot of hard work from a very few people, and especially institutionally at the state house, of just running that dog, man, just staying on it. That's a huge lift, like you
Yeah, and
said.
it's been incredibly rewarding, and it's funny that it's been so long that Representative Brennan didn't include the 3 years leading up to the passage of the uh, legalization of suppressors in Vermont. That passed in 2015 and became law then, but we were working it starting in 2012 with
Rough.
Representative Brennan. So it's been longer than those 9 years. You just
Golly
forget
gee.
about those things. But I mean, it really is something that has been just tremendously rewarding to see come to fruition in states like Vermont, states like New Hampshire, in Maine. My home state of Georgia. That was one of the main reasons why we started the association, was because I wanted to be able to hunt with a suppressor in the state, and you couldn't do it. And I didn't really like that. And it was like that Georgia wasn't the only southern state like that. We helped pass laws in Texas, Florida, Alabama, North Carolina, all opening up those states to allow hunters to use suppressors in the field. People today take it for granted, but it was very much not something that should have been taken for granted. And it's also was something where we had to overcome opposition in the hunting community. In my home state of Georgia, the biggest opposition, the most effective opposition that we had was one of the relevant committee chairs. He didn't like suppressors, even though he was a pro Second Amendment hunter. And he didn't like them because he thought that it was going to increase incidences of poaching. He'd obviously never shot with a suppressor, even though he claimed that he had. Tried to take him out to the
Uh-huh.
range. He would never come. We got a lot of his colleagues to come out, but never him. And we had to politically outmaneuver him, which was probably one of the most satisfying victories of my political career. But nonetheless, what a crazy hurdle to think that we have here. And
Yeah.
we still see some of that within the community. But I think by and large, and in large part due to the work of the Congressional Sportsmen Foundation, really helping push the actual facts about this stuff. But the hunting community is really only starting now to come over to the side of like suppressors being a tool. And I think there's a lot
That
of reasons for that, none of which are particularly important other than to say it's great to finally, feel like we're included in the hunting community at large, where the holdouts, the folks that oppose the use of suppressors in the field, are now currently the minority. That was not the case 10 years ago.
and we to your point, we do eat each other our own on a myriad of topics, but, this one with the poaching example, I've heard that argument levied against the implementation of crossbow hunting, more recently as technology has come along with air guns and air bows, and the overwhelming, argument I make, and that I think most of us make is bad people are gonna do bad things, man. Whether you give them the tool, they're just gonna do it. A poacher is as a poacher, man, they just got a sick drive to them, they just wanna kill stuff. That's it. It doesn't matter what they got. One way or another, they're going to do it. So, depriving all the law-abiding citizens from adding more tools or having more options is just ridiculous to solve this problem for, a handful of miscreants that, again, are gonna do it anyway. More to the bigger point, I don't certainly don't wanna compare hunting to violence, but same thing on the gun issue. All these people wanna try to take them away or roll back permissions, to, civil liberty for the actions of a few crazies where criminals are gonna do criminal things anyway, so take it away, and they're gonna find another way to do their deeds. So anyway, yeah, it's, I don't understand the rationale behind that, and, to your point, you'd think legislators that are friendly to it, um, wouldn't even go there, but again, we're so far down the road on it now, they're in the minority, which is
Yeah.
great, so, um, we will gladly take that. Before we finish up, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about ASA, and then also, current legislation that's tracking, um, mostly out of Massachusetts into Mexico, and, I know the, House Bill 1496 to legalize suppressor possession in Massachusetts, was committed to study here last week, so hopefully we can bring that one back and keep advancing that in the Bay State, but, any legislation you wanna highlight or just, talk about the organization as a
Yeah,
whole?
I mean, so you've got stuff like that legislation in Massachusetts, and funny story on that state. So we were pretty actively engaged with the legislature for a number of years. We would go out and work with y'all and with the Gun Owners Action League out there. Jim Wallace, heck of a great dude, and his team has been fantastic to work with. Incredibly highly of them. They're one of our favorite state associations to work with. Uh, Two funny stories from there. One, every year they hosted for a long time, they would host a legislative demonstration where they would invite people out to the range, legislators and staff members from the Hill. They would invite them out to the range, and Jim got an email on his phone, started chuckling as, Jim, what's going on? He said, I just got this email from an anti-gun staffer. And it's like, well, what does it say? He's like, well, they were asking about what the attrition rate for our demos are. He's like, it's like, what do you mean? It's like, they want to know how many people get killed every year at our demonstration. And like, they actually thought that was a thing, where like some,
Crazy.
incredibly dangerous thing to attend. That was the level of familiarity with firearms that we're dealing with the opposition. That was a
Yeah.
serious question from an employed staffer for a legislator, which is wild. Somebody who's influencing policy decisions in the state thought that people would die at the demonstration. Okay, that's one thing. On my 29th birthday, uh, myself, Jim Wallace, and the NRA lobbyist John Hohenwalder at the time were testifying on one of the pro-suppressor bills that did get called up for a hearing in the Senate. And when they called us up to testify, the entire room was almost completely filled with Moms Demand Action folks, and they started making this noise. And I looked at Jim and said, Jim, like, what are they doing? He's like, they're hissing. Welcome to Massachusetts.
Hissing.
We walked up there
Yeah.
with a room full of a couple hundred angry moms hissing at us, all because we want people to be able to protect their hearing when they use. And I thought that was just such an interesting experience. It was a bit surreal, but that's the level of opposition that we're dealing with in places like Massachusetts, in places like Rhode Island, in places like Illinois and California. We're sure there's a lot of people that do support it, but there's a lot of vehement opposition. And again, that's kind of why organizationally we've shifted our focus away from the direct lobbying, just because politically we don't think that that's a winning strategy at the moment. Rather shifting it towards the ASA Foundation, on which Brett Miller is actually one of our board members, and trying to file lawsuits in these states. We've already filed Anderson v. Raoul in the state of Illinois. We're waiting for a judgment. We're expecting that any day right now. It's June when we're filming this in 2024. We've been expecting a decision since about February. So we're in that window. We're well past when we thought we would have heard. But any day now we should hear on that. But our end game is obviously, like, we think regardless of the outcome, if we win, they're going to appeal it. If they win, we're obviously going to appeal it. And the appellate level is where we think the true fight is, not its trial court. But filing additional lawsuits, again, like we said, New Jersey, because the composition of the court is pretty favorable for us in that circuit, and also filing likely in California. We think that that's going to give us the highest likelihood to ultimately make suppressors legal in all 50 states. And not only that, if we win in our litigation strategy, and ultimately petition up to the Supreme Court, and they rule that the Second Amendment does actually apply to suppressors, which we, again, wholeheartedly believe it does, we will never have to fight another ban attempt, either at the state or the federal level. So there's obviously some ban attempts at multiple state levels. We fought it very hard in Virginia in 2019 and 2020 during that session. Thankfully, we won that. We fought it last year and this year in New Mexico. Thankfully, we won there. But make no mistake, our expectation is that within the next 5 to 10 years, if we don't win our litigation strategy, states are going to start banning them. States where their current markets, you look at places like the Pacific Northwest or like Colorado, we're very fortunate that Colorado has a governor who has presidential aspirations. Short of that, it's highly likely that they would have passed some of their assault weapons bans and likely, encroached on the right to own and use suppressors in that state. So really closing the door on ban attempts is critical for us. You look at the federal level, I think it's almost comical, but Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey, probably one of the most corrupt politicians in federal Congress, which is a pretty low bar. He's the one that's been leading the charge against suppressors there. I think that he's got bigger concerns with, gold bullion in his floor and bribery schemes and all sorts of things like that than he does at the moment. But nonetheless, that's something that we're taking very seriously. It's obviously has no chance of passage right now in the current Congress, but who knows what happens next cycle or 2 or 3 cycles down the road. At a certain point, there could be an instance where they do have the votes and they do have the White House and they have the political environment that they need to pass a ban on that. And that's something that obviously we need to do everything that we can to prevent. At the same time, when it comes to pro-suppressor advocacy at the federal level, we've got to do everything that we can to set the stage for success down the road. You read the political tea leaves, there's almost no chance that in the next Congress, even if a pro-gun president gets elected, if Trump gets elected, even if the Republicans maintain a slim margin in the House and somehow take over the Senate, they're still likely not going to have the votes necessary to pass something like the Hearing Protection Act. Obviously, that's our ultimate end game, and we're working to try and set the stage, working directly with folks like Taylor on the Hill to do so. Taylor being y'all's federal lead, but working to set the stage for that is critical. But also understanding really where you sit in the political scheme of things is I think also critical to having a realistic expectation of success or failure.
Your live demonstrations, I attended one before I was a team member here at CSF. I think are great. And I know at invitation, you guys will show up as an organization. Do you have the bandwidth to do these all the time, or what's the frequency? And how could legislators get a hold of you guys? Like, yeah, we curious, want to see it up close and personal, and maybe get behind
Just reach
a
out to
setup.
us. Absolutely. So we've got obviously great relationships with all the CSF lobbyists. If you have their contact information, you can get directly to us. And at any point in time, we are always happy to drop what we're doing and come and host a live fire demonstration for any legislature, for any regulator. So if you've got state agency folks, DNR, or whatever your state likes to call them, we are more than happy to drop what we're doing and come and take you to the range. We will take you everything from, unsuppressed 22, 9 millimeter handgun, 45 caliber handgun, 223 or 556 AR, so semi-automatic rifle. We'll shoot a deer gun and generally chambered in 308. We'll shoot a 12 gauge shotgun. We'll run through all of those conditions unsuppressed, put suppressors on them, and we'll run through all of those conditions with a suppressor. And after that, engage in a policy discussion based on your experience firsthand, not what you've seen in the movies, not what you've seen on YouTube. Because Fred, I mean, as well as anybody else, you just can't convey the difference in sound levels and still how loud those things are, even with a suppressor, by filming it and recording it. Microphones are only going to capture, up to a certain sound level, and whatever speaker headphone that you're using to listen to is only going to create a sound so loud. So there's really no way to fully grasp it until you actually experience it for yourself. And at any point in time, we are always happy to host those demonstrations.
I will tell you, as someone that held weapons for a considerable amount of time as my day-to-day profession when I was in the military, outside of war theater and just daily, I carried a rifle and a sidearm daily, and I didn't like shooting, man. I'll be straight up. A lot of people think, "Oh, you come from the military, you must love guns." I don't. I'm indifferent to them. I own them, but I do not like jump at the chance to go shoot because I got to clean it, I got to pick it up, and it just wasn't fun for me until I was at SIG, and I got behind an MPX, which is a 9 mil rifle, and we suppressed it, and we bladed the cardboard targets at 15 yards using some of the red dots that SIG has. And that whole setup made shooting fun again, man. I was like, holy smokes, this is a blast. Literally. And just sitting there with that 9 mil variant, and shooting was fun again. And like, I didn't hate it, and I didn't mind having to pick up some brass because the experience was so pleasurable. And I could see my kids getting up there and having fun with that and not being arduous, all because of all your sensory overload that can come with a shooting event, was mitigated. And it's just like, this is just fun, and you're demoing the platform and just the capability of an average shooter, if you will, no one that's, been trained in the last 10 years, go out there and do cool stuff. Like, yeah, that's a lot of fun. I want to be a part of that.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. And those MPXs are fantastic, dude.
Dude, love that gun. Was that the John Wick gun? I've never seen John Wick, but that's what everyone called it, the John Wick gun. I suppose so. It's fun. It's fun as hell to shoot. And more to the point, these demonstrations, it's much like trapping. Trapping is often the boogeyman of the sporting community, the hunting and conservation world, for all the same reasons. Take out suppressor, input trapping, and it's the same arguments, stuff they've seen on YouTube, stuff that HSUS puts out, and there's all these boogeymen. But as soon as they come to a trapping demo, and a licensed trapper takes his hand and sticks it in a foothold, or sticks it even in a conibear trap, a 110 or a 120, and all their digits function, and they can sit there and they can open the trap and say, "Look, I just did this to myself. These are a restraining device. You know, there aren't three-legged animals running around out here anymore, animals dying." Like, that's why it's so important to have these practical demonstrations, and why I am like a huge fan and advocating and try to get these things set up when and how we can, wherever we can, given people's bandwidth, because once people get out there and do it themselves, they have a real hard time going back to their colleagues and just
Yep.
going to that default. They can't if they
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
integrity,
Well,
they cannot.
that's a critical component to it. If they have, right, and if they're actually working on the policy rather than trying to appease their constituents, which is probably the single largest political hurdle that anybody has to clear, regardless of issue. But I think that you're right. Those folks, everyone needs to come at this stuff with an open mind, whether you're in the hunting community or not. Something might not be of interest to you, but just because it's not of interest to you doesn't mean that other people shouldn't be able to do it. So, whether it's a suppressor, whether it's trapping, whether it's using a crossbow or, a compound bow or a simple recurve bow, I think that in our community, we like, as you said, to eat our own. Well, that's not how I grew up doing it. So that's the wrong way to do it. And that's absolutely the wrong mentality that we need to have, especially looking towards the future, when recruitment and retention is so critical for us. If we want the hunting sports to stay alive, we need to be doing everything that we can to encourage people to get into the field. And we need to do that by appealing to as broad a base as possible. I truly think that using a suppressor in the field helps expand that base tremendously. I think it's technology that,
Heck yeah.
it's been around since 1908, 1909. So it's not exactly a new technology. It's just newly popular. And I think that,
Yeah.
again, regardless of the technology, call it suppressors, call it crossbows, call it whatever, we've got to come together and we've got to put forward a united front to say, pick your flavor. We don't care as long as it's ethical and righteous. Come in, use it, hunt with it, have fun, do your thing. We're just glad that you're enjoying the outdoors.
Amen. Yeah, and that's a fine way to put a bow on this great conversation, because I've definitely gone over the time I asked for. So I appreciate you hanging with me and working through all this and the technical snafu at the beginning. Um, Anything you want to plug? Where can the people find you? ASA? How do they get in
Yeah, man.
touch?
No, I've just got to say that our relationship with the Congressional Sportsmen Foundation is one that we value and treasure more than almost anything else. It's been truly phenomenal to work with your organization over the past. This is our 13th year, and we wouldn't be where we are organizationally without y'all. So kudos, hats off to you. Thank you for that. For anybody that's interested in the American Suppressor Association, check us out at americansuppressораssociation.com. When does this air?
This is airing on June 20th.
June 20th. Okay. So if you're hearing this on June 20th, we still have a raffle that's going on, one of our big fundraisers. Check that out at asaraffle.com. Tons of very cool prizes. SIG actually donated one of their Spear LT, I think chambered in 300 blackout. Amazing gun. Awesome for hunting hogs. Tons of fun to shoot with a suppressor on that. So that's a heck of a cool setup. Kind of the rifle caliber version of that MCX that we were talking about.
Uh-huh.
And if you're interested in the litigation, visit us at suppressor.org. That's the website for the American Suppressor Association Foundation, our 501c3 wing. That's where we're running the litigation through and a lot of public education campaigns. So check us out there. As with any organization, donations help keep the lights on, keep us active. Donate to ASA, donate to the foundation, and donate to our friends at CSF.
Cool, man. Well, appreciate it. Thanks again for your time and your leadership and the partnership. And there's no doubt we'll be doing great things in the future, the very near future. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Fred. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, joining us now, CEO of Silencer Central and CSF board member, Brandon Maddox. Brandon, welcome in. Thanks so much for joining us on the Sportsman's Voice podcast.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, it's great. I know I know we've been trying to line this up for quite some time, so I'm glad it was able to come together here.
Yeah, perfect. This is excellent.
We're gonna get into some wonky stuff, but I think it's important because of what House Resolution 6352, the tax stamp revenue transfer for Wildlife and Recreation Act, potentially does, especially on the heels of our last feature podcast where Ben O'Brien and I deep dove the American system of conservation funding and really got into Pittman Robinson, Dinkle Johnson, and got a master class from Ben on the genesis of all that and took us up to present day. So, when we're considering this tax stamp revenue transfer, right now, as the audience may or may not know, silencers are not taxed right now for the purposes of transferring funds into conservation funding. Now, as I understand it, this bill would take 15% to help facilitate the additional background checks and getting some time down, and then 85% of that would be redirected to the fund. If I'm wrong, correct me. If I'm right, take it from there and give us some more.
Sure. So, the background is anyone that buys a silencer since 1934, it's in the same process as buying a machine gun. So there's that $200 people here call it tax stamp, NFA tax stamp. And to your point, there's no upcharge on a silencer like there are regular firearms and ammunition, where you have that either 10 or 11% sort of imputed tax that the consumer pays, and then it goes to conservation. So essentially, right now, silencers are negated from that because the feds collect a $200 tax to process the paperwork. And that money, like you said, goes directly to the treasury. So it doesn't go into anything earmarked specifically. It just goes to whatever our elected officials decide that day is the best place for the money to go. And to give perspective, we anticipate 1 million transfers will occur this year. So if you multiply that by 200, pretty simple math, $200 million could potentially be
Mhm.
flowing in to conservation. So excited about that. The interesting thing that's changed in the last few months, which is going to cause changes on the bill, the ATF is currently approving silencers in what I would call real time. We have consumers that are buying silencers, we're submitting them for a background check, and the same day they're getting approval. So the
Really?
pushback, yeah. So the pushback from elected officials, which is rightfully so, why should we give more money to the ATF? Because the original theory was that the ATF was struggling to staff up to meet the demands of the marketplace and process these in a timely manner. So let's create an incentive for them that they get more budget and get to hire more people, and then they would be held accountable to process these in a reasonable period of time. Well, they're able to produce them, these transfers in a reasonable period of time now. So why give them additional funds? So the goal will be to keep a majority of that money into conservation, and then other money would go to like veteran issues,
Mm.
veteran suicide, and then some other, child proofing guns, things like that, sort of things that would benefit the industry. But the lion's share would still go to conservation. The thought was, how do we pull out the ATF thing? There was some Republicans too that were a little scared to sign on to a bill that says they're going to fund the ATF, even though it would benefit gun owners. So we felt like it probably has a win in a couple directions that would make the bill more acceptable to both parties. But yeah, it would be a large sum of money, and it would be nice because now I guess it's difficult buying a silencer knowing that 200 goes to wherever Ukraine is. What you have no idea where it's going to go.
Right.
Whereas at least you feel like it's going back to conservation to support, a hobby that most gun enthusiasts are involved in, and it also part of Pittman Robertson dollars goes to build ranges, which doesn't necessarily have to be affiliated with hunting. So there's a lot of benefits to firearms owners and users. So that's the big reason why we came up with this. I mean, the downstream goal of it and, sort of behind the play is that this money ends up flowing into local agencies. So I think about, South Dakota where I live, game fish and parks would benefit from some of this money. So the
Absolutely.
goal would be that hopefully these states would not create making silencers unlawful in their state. Because the goal would be to put in this bill that, if New Mexico decides to make silencers illegal, then the money that had been coming in through this Pittman Robertson Conservation Fund, they would be cut off from that if they made silencers illegal. So really the
True.
goal is to benefit, conservation and benefit the consumer who's buying it, but then also to benefit the longevity for firearms owners and dealers and manufacturers and everything uh, for the industry itself. So that was sort of the back end goal as well.
So it should be said, and I probably should have started with this as I introduced the bill, but it is co-sponsored by Congressman Moore out of Utah and Congressman Golden out of Maine, both Congressional Sportsman Caucus members down there on the Hill. So um, big CSF support here on that as far as the legislators go and partners. Um, Man, I had a thought and it just disappeared as fast as it came.
That's all right.
No, so here it is. You mentioned getting everyone up to speed, all the states up to speed on allowing silencers to be utilized during hunting pursuits. Audience learned earlier that, there's 8 states currently, plus Connecticut that allows but doesn't allow for the hunting with silencers. So I not knowing that this was kind of baked into the cake, I think it's a wonderful incentive to push that at the state level and get all 50 states on board here, especially getting, as you alluded to, this $200 million piece of pie to go to those states.
Yeah.
Um, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. That's a lot of money. That would be the largest infusion ever into that Pittman Robertson. And, if you look at trends, there's less money going into that fund just because some hunters are dying out, and in
Mhm.
some cases and in some states, the younger population is not replacing them. So this would help bridge that gap as we try to get more people into hunting and into the conservation efforts. It would bridge the gap nicely and create additional funding for for the states so they could do activities to help conservation and management at a state level.
I'm curious of your take because you're on both sides of it as far as um, the sporting community, hunting and conservation, understanding how that model works, and also understanding that recreational shooters are the largest contributors to that based on, the point you just made that hunting participation is down by virtue of biology and then
Yeah.
people not being recruited, retained, or reactivated in R3. So, do you think that the sports shooting community understands the impact that they have, people outside of doing both?
Yeah, I'd say very few, if I doubt
Yeah.
many, because I've seen so many efforts where people try to, do PR campaigns and talk about it. And when you interview people and ask them, do they realize that part of the price of every box of ammunition or firearm or, archery accessory or whatever, anything that you're using for hunting has a tax in it. It's going to conservation. Most people have zero awareness.
What's the feedback? Do people just Are they indifferent to it, or do people like, "Hey, that's pretty great, getting probably good benefit for my dollar because it's already as I assume they learned through line of questioning that it's already baked into the cake. They're not going to Bass Pro Shops and getting an 11% added
Right.
on. It's part of that fee that
Yeah,
they're
it's
willing
big.
to pay anyway.
Yeah. So every time you buy a gun, that's already built into the price or ammunition. Um, I think that most people get it. I think there's some people out there that feel like it's a sin tax and it shouldn't be there. But if you look at the rest of the world, really from a conservation perspective, as you know, we're sort of the envy of the rest of the world. We kind of have a pay to play. So we're paying and we're preserving, and there's not too many other countries that can say that. Um, and I think it's been a good synergistic. It helps me on the firearm side because I know that they were looking at running what I guess the industry would consider almost a woke director when Biden was first elected to office, the a woke director of the ATF and a lot of the conservation groups. Like I even heard like Senate testimony saying that even Ducks Unlimited is against this guy. So I think
Yeah.
it really helped when the conservation groups that are typically not seen as politically picking one side or another and
Here.
to be more considered almost indifferent to the situation. But they also realized these conservation groups that they are tied to the sales of firearms. And if someone comes in and regulates them so highly that no firearms sale, that it could have an impact on conservation as well. So it really is a good synergistic win-win. And it's good to have that insight, like you said, on both sides to see it.
Yeah, the story, I mean, again, I keep coming back to the last episode just because it just connects so well to this conversation. Even hunters don't know it in vast majority of
Agreed.
them. So,
Yeah.
and they just so I can't imagine that transfers well to the majority the shooting community. I guess I'm happy that there isn't a negative recoil to
Yeah.
that people
Right.
aren't finding out and being like, "Oh, my money's being spent on this." And I guess that's more of an idea of how we would like the general public to be is indifferent. We can't
Yeah.
recruit everyone to come into the field. There'd be no room for us. There's not enough public land to accommodate. But we also, would like some more, but also appreciate that the general public just stays cool. That's just neutral,
Yeah.
and not have that adverse reaction to it.
Yeah, I think anytime you go, like I see it typically teed up at s- different type of sportsman shows and things like that. They'll kind of go through and kind of live camera interview and say, "Hey, did you know this?" And pretty much 100% of the time they say no unless they're in the industry. And then once they say, "Wow, that's kind of neat. I didn't realize that." It's almost like a sunk cost in their mind. They've already spent the money, so it's great. It went to something that they benefited from. Um,
Mhm.
but again, it takes a little bit of forethought to kind of look at it and say, "Wow, I mean, we've actually built something in America everybody else wishes they had. Here's how it was done, and it was happening behind the scenes, and I didn't even know it." So it's kind of a wow. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, and just like in the beginning, we learned with that first conference, it was a bipartisan effort, all sorts of stakeholders from all over, and here with this 6352, also bipartisan legislation, which obviously our organization champions. It's the largest bipartisan bicameral caucus down there on that hill.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, that's why I do think there's an opportunity for this because, of course, my lobbyists will say it's hard to get Republicans and Democrats to agree on anything, but one of the core issues they do agree upon is conservation. So that's why this being conservation focused, we feel like it does have a chance of potentially passing and excited about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at the last Congress, uh, 27 bills hit the president's desk. Two of those were conservation bills, and
Yeah.
the updates to the Safer Communities and then the Duck Stamp Modernization Act, all of which CSF championed. So, yeah, it would be really awesome, maybe a little Pollyannish to think it gets done in an election year, but
Yeah.
yeah, we're definitely with you and pushing to make any improvements that may be there, because a win for conservation is a win for all of us, and
Totally.
I don't see that $200 stamp going anywhere anytime soon.
No, I agree. I agree. That's yeah. Because a lot of people say, "Hey, would you love to just completely deregulate silencers?" Yeah, but that's kind of a pipe dream in the current scenario. So why not kind of crawl, walk, run? And I kind of see this as let's crawl. Let's make sure there's a benefit to us, conservation, and state organization. So it kind of creates a win-win, and it's already being taxed. So it's not
Right.
like it's a new tax.
Go into that line of thought for people that aren't in the know, like, what does that mean? So, we've discussed that, silencer is a serialized item, it's classified as a firearm, but it's not treated the same. So, you say, it's kind of a pipe dream. Explain that a little bit for the audience so they can understand that.
Yeah. So, my understanding on the history of the silencer regulation is that, right after Prohibition, when they decided to start regulating machine guns through the NFA, National Firearms Act process, that $200 tax was equivalent to a 100% tax on a machine gun. And
Yeah.
Congress at the time wanted to put handguns into that same process as machine guns. And I think there was enough pushback, like, "Hey, we just got our alcohol rights back. We don't want to lose our handguns." And I think the sort of the trading under the table was, "Why don't we put silencers in there instead of handguns?" And
Yeah.
I think that most people go, "Why would that ever be in there?" I mean, some of the most liberal countries in the world, you could buy silencers at the local hardware store. They're not serialized. They're not seen as a public safety issue. So most people that are kind of in the know are like, "Why would that ever be so highly regulated?" I think there was no one at the table that was an advocate for silencers. They just heard, "Hey, it's either handguns or silencers," and they thought, "Well, I've never used a silencer. That's not gonna be a negative to me. Go ahead and throw that in the mix." And
Yeah.
so unfortunately, it's been straddled with that, classification of going through the process of buying it and, submitting fingerprints, photo, and, waiting for the ATF to process an FBI background check. And again, that's what we built our business model on, making that process simple. But obviously, the intention and the goal of the government was to make it more difficult to buy it, to kind of restrict commerce by adding the tax and then creating the process. But of course, legislatively, a lot of people in the firearms industry would love to see a silencer to be recategorized as the same as a regular firearm, meaning a handgun or a long gun that you could walk in, buy it, do a background check, and walk out with it. And the Hollywood hasn't done us any favors. Most Democrats or what I would call even moderate Republicans hear the word silencer, they think of what they saw growing up in the movies with people dying and no sound at all. And
Right.
the thought of making that easier to buy just really scares them. And as we all know, politicians typically don't look at the data because if they would look at the data, they would see it's not a public safety issue. If silencers are used in crimes, almost 100% of the time, it's one that was homemade and it didn't go through the current process of,
Right.
go through an FFL dealer and have to go through the process of buying it. So there's been a lot of discussion of deregulating them. And our theory has been, yeah, we'd love that, but when you got a Congress that Senate is so tight where it is, and a Democrat presidency, it makes sense to create small wins instead of just always trying to hit a grand slam. Let's start with a small win of benefiting conservation and benefiting the consumer and also the state agencies, and then work on that fight of deregulating them later after you got a little bit of momentum.
Sure, sure. No doubt. Yeah, Hollywood has done very little to help the case in any of that. And, speaking earlier on the show, it's to the point that, criminals and bad people are going to do bad things,
Yeah,
um, whether stuff's legal or not. So the health benefits to that, the good neighbor benefits. I mean, where
totally.
I live in New Hampshire, if it's not posted, we can play on. It's pretty congested. So as you're going about the field and you're turkey hunting or you're doing some pheasant hunting, you're not too far from dwellings and people hearing you, business parks or whatever. So, there's a lot of value in just being good neighbors, having these devices available to the hunting community, especially, and not making noise. It's not a matter of, oh, you're going to have a bunch of new poachers on the landscape. No, poachers are going to poach, and the rest of us are going to do the right thing because it's just who we are. It's ingrained, and we're not about that life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny because when I first started this business, I started in South Dakota. My wife's from here, and that's how I ended up here. And it wasn't until I opened a store in Minnesota I started hearing that. My neighbor says he doesn't mind if I shoot, but I never hear him. So almost like it was a polite thing, is I'd like to buy a suppressor just so that I don't aggravate my neighbor or create any rough issues or tension or worry him if he's not a shooter and hears guns going
Mhm.
off, thinks they're coming bullets at him or whatever. So yeah, I agree. That's a big deal. That's a big benefit, to have a suppressor. And obviously there's the benefits for the hunting, the hearing, the recoil, but there's also the benefits of um, neighbors. And I see more and more ranges looking at policies where it's kind
Yeah.
of like you either close the range or you go to all suppressors. So of course we like to hear that, all suppressors.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's true. Again, that's another example. I mean, in a built-up, compact area like southern New Hampshire, where we do have plenty of private and public ranges, yeah, they get noise complaints, and a lot of times the city or the town select board will, fight that tooth and nail because they just don't want to have the noise ordinance have to be updated and so on. So this is again another tool in the toolbox for solving problems and everyone winning. So you've mentioned it a couple times, Brandon. Uh, you built your business, Silencer Central, around solving problems. Please bring us through the organization. Talk about Silencer Central, the product and the services you provide.
Yeah, sure. So, I think what people sometimes find interesting is I'm a pharmacist by trade. I went to pharmacy school and went into the pharmaceutical industry and did sales and marketing. And um, my wife's from South Dakota, moved here and started shooting prairie dogs. And what I found is, they're more astute, these prairie rats, than people would think. You get a couple rounds off in the air and they hear them and they start crawling in their hole and don't want to come out. So I kept thinking I drove 4.5 hours for this. How do I solve this? And I bought a suppressor, and the process honestly was horrible at the local dealer. And I don't necessarily blame the local dealer. The local dealer's business model is kind of pick out the firearm, get a background check, and leave with it. Kind of, being in the healthcare, you'd say treat them and street them. It's kind of the vernacular that you think through when you
Correct.
think about a mom and pop store. But with a suppressor, there's a fair amount of back and forth. So
Agree.
I ended up getting my own license, honestly, just to make it easier for myself to get suppressors. My father-in-law had a federal firearms license in his pharmacy, so I kind of saw firsthand the benefits of having an FFL. So I
Sure.
thought, well, let's just go ahead and max it out and get the part where I could do the silencers too. And the license is kind of expensive, so then that kind of got me into it. But because the license is expensive, the wife's putting a little pressure, like, okay, we're paying $1,000 a year for you to play with these toys. You got to sell a few
Right.
just to cover your license. And
That's right.
what I found is maybe the pharmacy training, but detail is kind of my thing. So I just filling out the paperwork and making it simpler. I mean, I went into the first gun shop, and this is, early 2000s. They basically handed me the paperwork, said, go figure it out and bring it back when you figure it out. Um, and so I thought, gosh, once I decided to create a business, I'm like, how about instead of putting the burden on the consumer, how about I take the burden as a dealer and say, hey, I'll help you fill all this out. And really, the whole business model for the last 20 years has been how do you make the process easier to buy a suppressor? So, like every day
Mhm.
we wake up and say, how can we take the process and make it easier? And I'll say we've worked, even from like the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation type mindset, we've worked directly with our elected officials and directly with ATF to make the process easier where you can get variances and all the process we can do is 100% digital. And that's just from, meeting with ATF and looking for specifically what they're requiring, what their requirements are, what they want, what they need for compliance, and then for us to execute on that. But we started in South Dakota, and just like a handgun, a suppressor you have to buy from a dealer licensed in the state where you're a legal resident. So, if I wanted to sell a suppressor to someone in North Dakota, I had to have a license there. So, I was working shows in northern South Dakota, and people would come to the gun show from North Dakota. And I said, I got to get a license in North Dakota. So I just kept plugging away, and now Silencer Central is licensed in all 42 states where suppressors are legal.
Mhm.
So the way our business model works is those FFLs in all those states are mine. They're in my name, my LLC name, my EIN. The people that work at these locations are my employees, so they're W-2 employees. But essentially, if someone buys from Silencer Central, either online, over the phone, or we work a lot of events, we process all the paperwork, and then when the ATF approves it, that paperwork is done on the back end in the state where the customer lives. So for you in New Hampshire, our approval would go to the New Hampshire location manager. He would do all the paperwork on the back end. We would send you the 4473, the same thing you fill out when you buy a gun
Yep.
digitally. You'd fill it out, send it back to us, and then we actually mail the physical silencer from our location there in New Hampshire to your front door. So
Awesome.
um, so basically it's a business model. How do we streamline the process? Because working gun shows over the last 20 years and sportsman shows and farm shows and conservation shows and all these kind of outdoor shows, what I've learned is the obstacle of buying a suppressor is the paperwork. So if you tell someone and you have to convince them with, some, not only show them, but, walk them through how you do it. Once they realize that you have nailed the process on
Yeah.
making it easy for them, they're more apt to open their wallet. And as soon as they're convinced you make the process easy, typically the next question is, how do I get started? And then that works out really well. We do all the paperwork for them and then we just ship it right to their front door. Um, so of course our business model started at only events, and then there was COVID. And by that time I had licenses in all 42 states. So I took the plunge of direct to consumer advertising and the direct to consumer message. I honestly didn't know how it would play. To me, it seems sort of far fetched and controversial to say a silencer can be shipped to your front door. I think most people are like, who's this crazy guy in South Dakota who thinks he can ship a silencer? At one point, ATF told me they were getting 500 calls a week, and I feel sure most of them were my competition. Like, how does this guy do this? Because the assumption in the community was this is illegal. There's no way he does this.
Mhm.
But, after time, I think people said, well, he keeps advertising. It's still in the magazines and online and appears to be legit. There's some other people who are vouching for this crazy guy. And over time, we've become the largest dealer in the nation. And most manufacturers out there, I would say we're their largest dealer. And we also have a brand that we make or we have outsourced that's made for us. And the reason why we had that made was a few reasons. One, we felt like when we first came into the suppressor market, everything out there was 100% tactical focused. And I think you could potentially argue right now that's still the marketing and sort of demographics that most silencer manufacturers are going after. And we found that the consumers in the Dakotas where we started, they were interested in really lightweight. So you'll see almost everything we have is titanium. They wanted stuff that was super quiet. They were more worried about quiet than anything else and lightweight. And then also a lot of them like to be able to take them apart and clean them. So that's why we came up with the Banish line. But it fits the idea of making it easy to buy a silencer because what you're seeing now is really no one has silencers in inventory or on the shelf because of the quick approvals currently. And if my business model was based on only selling other people's stuff, I would be out of business right now because I'd have nothing to sell.
Yeah.
So we've done a really good job outsourcing to large, mostly military type contractors that are familiar with titanium that do higher end type, missiles, aircraft, things like that. And so when you have 5 or 6, 7 different manufacturers making your suppressors, you're able to scale that up and down more easily. So when the rest of the industry ends up being out of everything, then we're in a position where we have product on the shelf. And again, it goes back to making it easy because I always say I can't make it easy for you to get a silencer if I don't have anything in inventory and then no one else does either.
Talk about the process being intimidating and a couple things come to mind. One, I think those of us who are, people on our side of the fence, if you will, that are into hunting, even the majority, I think, when they first hear it, it's intimidating, because of the Hollywood effect. One, is this how
Yeah.
could this possibly be legal? And then when they find out very quickly that it is, it's the paperwork is a barrier to entry. So what you guys have been able to do and streamline that and make that bring that service to the consumer, obviously it's a fantastic idea. You guys are absolutely killing it. I feel like when I first saw Silencer Central many, many years ago at this point now, I almost, and maybe this isn't fair, but I felt like the best way I could compare it to is like when Onyx first hit the ground.
Yeah.
Like they didn't, you see Onyx, very small booth at a trade show. You're like, what the hell are these guys doing? There's no physical product. What are they doing?
Yeah.
And then you go talk to them, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. And then the same thing with you guys. It's like, what? at first, like, what are they doing? Like, there's nothing to sell, and then you go in the booth and talk. Oh, okay. And to your point, first I was like, "There's no way this is legal. How is this possible?"
True, true.
But, and here we are all these years later, and, you CSF board member, how did that come about? And obviously you're so busy, how do you even make time for that? And why CSF of all the organizations you could work?
You know, so a couple things. I mean, obviously, I looked at the current board members, and if you look at the list of the board members, it's really a who's who in the firearms and fishing industry, the CEOs. So, um, like you're saying, what I found working a booth at a show is there's a credibility issue. So people, if they haven't heard of you, they're going to be hesitant to buy from you.
Right.
Um, and essentially, in my model, you're asking someone to give you money up front and all their demographics. I mean, social security, fingerprint. I mean, photo. I mean, I've got enough on you to, do bad stuff. So
Yeah.
it's easy for consumers to be very skeptical of, okay, who's this company? Who's this guy? So I'm always seeking ways to build trust. And when I looked at the list of the people on there, I was like, wow, if I could just get them interested in getting me on that board, that would bring more credibility to my business. And it would also allow me to mingle with people and get to know them and show the value that we bring to the industry so that then they would have a respect for me and they could vouch for me as well. So the sort of the self benefit for me was building the trust. But once I started to get to know the folks there and, we have a lobbyist that works in the conservation area. And one thing I do is tap into his knowledge of the industry and just, having lived in that space in DC, his advice to me was that would be the best thing possible for you to get on the CSF board for many reasons. One, it's bipartisan, so you're going to have support of both Republicans and Democrats. Um, Two, you're going to have a better chance of being heard by elected officials if you do want to talk to them. They're going to feel like it brings an additional level of trust if you're on an actual board. You probably, you know, it assumes you probably have connections where you know more about what you're talking about. Um, it's opened so many doors for me with elected officials. It's opened so many doors for me from a networking perspective. My team will be like, "Oh my gosh, what did you tell this company at XYZ about us? They're calling us tripping over themselves, wondering how they could partner with us." And I'm thinking to myself, what did I do? And I'm like, oh, I had lunch with the CEO at a CSF board, and I mentioned that there's probably an opportunity for us to work together, that we sell a lot of silencers. I noticed we don't sell any of theirs. How about you ship us some and we try it? And then,
Yeah.
next thing you know, we're their largest dealer. So, it's really worked out from that point. I felt like last year, my goal in sort of my first sort of full year, first full term, or I guess I'm going on 2 years, but my first full year was to try to attend every event that was available. And I think that
Yep.
really helped me too, to kind of immerse myself in it, get to know the other board members really well, get to know some of the ones that had been on the board that are now kind of grandfathered in or kind of, honorary members. And then also just meet elected officials. So I think that was a good move on my part when I don't want to say I wasn't as busy, but just new on there. I felt like I could justify it to my team here in South Dakota. Hey, I'm going to be gone a lot. I'm going to try to go to every event they do just to really immerse myself in it and figure out what the benefits are. So I think that really helped me get up to speed on what's going on. But no, it's been great for me and it forces me to keep up with stuff. I mean, I would say that I am constantly with locations in 42 states. I'm impacted by 42 state legislators and federally. So I have to really plug myself in 24/7. So anytime I get an email alert, I have Google alerts set up for all this stuff. So I'm already immersed in it. So it even creates a better opportunity for me. But what I like about it now is, like if there's a CSF employee that covers, say, Washington State, they may call me and say, hey, there's actually a bill that just got dropped that could potentially make silencers illegal. So then it gets me engaged like, huh, this is
Yep.
not good. We sell a lot there. So, it creates a good, communication. There's benefits to me and also there's benefits to the board. And I think one benefit I saw is there was no one on the board to sort of bring the perspective from a compliance and a relationship with the ATF,
Hey,
which most manufacturers and most firearms dealers don't have. Typically, they have an adversarial. So my sales pitch was I have a good working relationship. I feel like whether I like it or not, the ATF has a monopoly on interpreting the rules. So I want to make sure I understand what their interpretations are, but then also to bring the silencer perspective to the table, to kind of have someone at the table that could be an advocate for silencers. Because sometimes I felt like decisions were being made by firearms manufacturers that maybe 1% of their business was silencers. But I like the fact that now there's someone at the table that 100% of my business is suppressors, silencers.
have you found in these conversations at these CSF events that, and they're bipartisan conversations. What is their reaction been to you, and then the conversation around these air finger quote boogeymen and silencers?
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to think, or I hope, maybe I'm misled, but I think that they like that I'm super knowledgeable about regulations in a state and federal area and how changes can impact them and bring a true business perspective to it. I find the elected officials do as well because what the great thing about meeting an elected official is I can pull up my little phone and say, hey, I've got a store in your state and here's where the location is, and I pay income tax and sales tax there in your state. So really, I'm a constituent, inadvertently with every elected official I can end up talking to. But I think even from the board perspective, honestly, people in the industry sometimes think they're more knowledgeable about things than they are. I mean, I probably think I'm more knowledgeable than some people on some things, but there's probably a lot of things I know nothing about. And it's not a knock on the board, but I would say there was very few people that knew very much about suppressors. So my goal was, hey, how do I get these people interested in suppressors so maybe they go through the process, or maybe how do I get them engaged talking about it? How do I get them to think about some benefits to, putting silencers into stuff they're already currently doing? If they're doing demos of firearms, how do we add suppressors? I'll set them free. Just ways to interject so that they could learn and become more familiar with suppressors. And hopefully that's made, the board stronger just to have that additional knowledge because I feel like we all benefit from it.
Now that certainly speaks to, how we are made up at CSF, from the board all the way down to the state program team coordinator, just cutting their teeth with the organization, is that we have policy experts. We all recognize we can't know everything all the time.
Yeah.
So we have different portfolios at our level. And then just being able to collaborate and work together. And, even at the state level, when we go sit down with somebody, again, those legislators, they don't know everything and they can't possibly know everything. So our service to, that being our membership is to educate and advocate and let them know where you may be going wrong or where you're going right. And here's how we can make it even better. Let's get this over the finish line. So that definitely what you're saying at the board level and your own experience, that runs throughout the organization. And quite frankly, what makes us so powerful and why we have the size caucus we do on the Hill and we're so well respected at the state capitals and why people turn to us. It's
Yeah.
a powerful thing.
Yeah. No, totally. Like I said, ended up wanting to go into it selfishly just to kind of build credibility for the company and for the industry, the suppressor industry, but it's worked out great. And like I said, when I meet these elected officials, they do connect and they're interested when I say I have a location in your state, here's where it is. And then when you start, then they're interested in the business. Like, well, how does it work? And how do you sell in our state? And once you tell them, it does draw them in instead of coming and saying, hey, I'm pushing this issue or I'm pushing this idea. It's, hey, I've got a license in your state and I'm paying taxes there. And I employ
Right.
people in your state. I sell to everyone in your state. So it makes it a different discussion. Just brings more credibility to the discussion.
Yeah, for sure. And then I would imagine to kind of bring this full circle is if this piece of federal legislation was to get passed, uh, you being one of the biggest dealers or the biggest dealer, I'm not sure what your
Yeah.
status is, but up
Oh, yeah.
there, that'd be quite a significant lift to the conservation community and all those state agencies in 42 states. And God willing, we can change the mind in the other 8 states and
Yeah.
contribute to all of them. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it would benefit everyone. I think it's a win-win. We'll just keep plugging away.
Absolutely. Sir, where can people find you, Silencer Central, and hit the highlights where they should be finding you guys and interacting if they have questions?
Yeah, the basics. Obviously the social media, you could just search for Silencer Central. We're pretty much everywhere that you are from a social media perspective. You can come to our website, silencercentral.com. Sometimes I recommend, just call into, don't feel like you got to buy something. You talk to our sales team. They're very proficient at sort of explaining to you how the process works. They're all, shooters, hunters, so they're going to be able to direct you. What I find is a lot of people don't realize that you could buy a 30 cal suppressor and use it on almost every rifle you own. That's something that
Right.
sometimes people are scared to get a suppressor because they're like, well, they look at their safe and go, gosh, if I have to get one for everyone in here, it's going to be expensive. But when you tell them that, hey, you could probably buy one and cover 95% of your rifles, they're like, wow, I'm interested. I want to learn more. So I would
Yeah.
say, call in. The good thing about creating a connection internally is that then if you have questions, you could call and say, hey, this adapter doesn't seem to work, or how do I get this break off this gun? Or, you kind of got access to someone internally that you can call and touch base with. But Yeah, you're right. We're the number one, largest dealer. We ask, ATF, we asked them how many people have submitted silencer gun trust, like how many were pending in their system. And they basically told us we're 40% of the market of the people who submitted as a trust. So we know that we're, definitely one of the biggest submitters to the ATF e-forms process.
That's no small feat. Well, I'm glad you're out there. Certainly glad that you're on our board and help lead and steer and also, your own advocacy and educating our board members and our leadership and everybody
Right.
else because, it takes everybody. And again, coming back to we can't all know everything. So it's good to have subject matter experts at our disposal. Um, Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so one thing I did mention that I think is sort of beneficial, it's going to sound like we're tooting our own horn, but we do give to conservation groups free silencers. So if there's anyone listening that has a local conservation group, typically like a local conservation group chapter would reach out to Silencer Central. We would give you a free silencer that you could auction off at your local event. It's 100% donation, so you get to keep 100% of the proceeds. And, to pat ourselves on our back, we're on track to do over $5 million in donations, direct
That's
donations,
awesome.
100% this year. So, um, you know, big organizations, Ducks Unlimited, this will be their number one fundraising activity, well over exceeding $1 million this year they'll make from that. So there's a lot of organizations, pretty much every conservation organization, we're either their number one or top three donor of all the donors they have. So it's something we're proud of and focus on. And, the original objective was just to A, get our name out there, B, let people know you can hunt with them, and then C, have an advocate in the room that went through our process and worked with us, who then the following year could say, "Hey, I went through it. It's legit. It worked out really great," and recommend us. So it's really been a win-win, and we've got a lot of positive feedback, and it's helped us create strong relationships with all the conservation groups in the country. So if there's things that you're attending locally that don't have that, feel free to call us or have your regional directors that manage those call us because we'd love to be a part of those.
Yeah, for sure. And I've seen them myself personally at NWTF banquets locally.
Oh,
So
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're out there.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah, no,
yeah,
NWCF was one of the first ones. I mean, I
yep.
always make it sound easy, but a lot of these were tough, man. We'd meet with these folks and they'd say, "Hey, we got a lot of old white guys on our board. They're not interested in these silencer things." But so it took a lot of years of me meeting with people and talking to them and getting them to go through the process, and then them seeing the benefit to their chapters and to their organization. It's been a
Well,
real win-win.
and
It's been
trust
great.
issues too, right? You alluded to that. Like this sounds too good to be true kind of deal, and people would scoff at it. But
Yeah, people said 100% donation. Why would you do that? And I just said, well, it gets my name out there, gets people through the process, lets people know they're good for hunting. And, um, from a gun side, if you hear people from a gun rights perspective, they love it because they said a lot of these conservation groups sometimes don't want to talk about guns because they want to stay neutral. And sometimes guns can be polarizing. So
right.
the gun groups are like, man, what you've done is you've forced, not that conservation wouldn't, but they've continued to embrace more of the firearms because now it's one of their biggest fundraisers. So I think it's been a win-win to sort of keep the two hand in hand, conservation firearms, kind of like we talked about with the Pittman Robertson. The taxes from the firearms are benefiting conservation, so it's a win-win working together. So this has kind of been a similar scenario.
Well, I mean, and so many, truthfully, firearms issues do affect our sporting community for access when they start trying to screw around with age restrictions. When they start screwing around with what variants you're allowed to have, and I deal with it all the time here in the Northeast. They want to take away semi-automatics, carte blanche across the board, and it's like that that person over there running their semi-automatic Beretta turkey gun is now going to be affected by this because you think you're going after those military. I'm doing the air quotes for listening audience. From your quote military grade weapons, which don't truly exist in
Right.
the public sphere. So there's so many implications. Again, to contribute to what you said, we at CSF definitely weigh in where that's relevant. Of course, some of the civil rights type stuff, working with our partners, NSSF and the like, let them go and then help support that. But definitely from an access issue and as it concerns, the true sin tax, we just awarded one in Connecticut. We were very happy about. I think Massachusetts just probably had one die or is about to. So, yeah, those issues we jump all over because they directly affect the conservation funding model. And, you start putting an additional 11% on somebody and that is not worth the juice ain't worth the squeeze here. I can't
Yeah.
afford it.
Right.
So,
Totally.
yeah, for sure. Well, look, I've taken up the allotted amount of time I promised you. I know you're very, very busy operating all those 42 states and being the number one dealer in the country. So thank you for your time. Thank you for what you do on the board and being a partner and your leadership. And I look forward to seeing that event. We got some coming up here in the last couple of quarters. So hopefully we'll see you out at one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, appreciate the opportunity. Been an honor to be on here today. So thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks so much to our guests, Knox, Brandon. Thoroughly appreciate the conversation, the spirited conversation at some points. Um, I appreciate both of their time. I said I would only take so much of their time, and we ended up going over, but it's fun conversations, good conversation, and stuff you often don't really hear about unless you're really, if you're in the know, I guess. I think if you're just a casual shooter or just someone that only gets out during the weekends, probably not a subject you're familiar with, probably not something you're really up on as far as suppressor legislation, where we're at as far as legalization, that some people may not even know you can even have them, right? Going back to that Hollywood default of just mobsters and bad people having these things. Oh, as we learned, the many benefits to suppressor utilization and ownership, and certainly making that ownership more streamlined and quite frankly easier to come by, right? Through the work that Brandon's doing, stuff that Knox's organization tries to do. We got a little bit more work with 8 more states, some challenge states, but I mean, heck, you consider Connecticut, where not having this conversation and just kind of going about your life, you would think, well, Connecticut probably not a place you can have a suppressor, but no, there you go. We just got to get them implemented for the use during hunting seasons, and that's a pretty big deal right there in a state like Connecticut. If we can turn that, so definitely looking forward to engaging on that, working alongside ASA to hopefully hit a milestone there in the Nutmeg State, and the other states. We got some work, but it's happy work, and we'll keep going. The Vermont bill. I mean, that's over a decade long it took. So many of these things are marathons, not they're not short sprints. It's probably not getting done in a single session, maybe, not 2, 3, or 4 or 5. But if we have good leadership in our sportsmen's caucuses, as we do, and we keep grinding it out and keep making these things a priority, good things will happen, as we see there in Vermont. Just got to be involved. And, again, it comes back to your vote. Put people that are friendly to us in these positions of power that are able to make law, and we can have nice things. So you gotta show up. Again, Brandon, certainly a interesting model there, and so interesting where he started. I didn't know. I feel like I had heard it, but I just hadn't committed to memory knowing where he started. Who would have thought, someone coming out of the world he was in the medical field, and here he is present in all those states, he said, with a business presence, and he's providing that service and all those voices. It's a good organization that will speak up for and work alongside our leadership. And he's, like you said, he's got a voice in all these different states. He's not just one state, and be able to say that to legislators. That's pretty powerful. So thank you to both gentlemen again for making the time. We appreciate it. I think that's it. As this episode drops, it is hot as Hades out there. I think the whole country is in a conventional oven, and that sucker's turned on high. So as you go about the rest of your week, on to the weekend, you're doing your outdoor recreating on the water, in the woods, or whatever it is you're doing, be safe. It's hot. Hydrate. Bring that pack out there, plenty of water, and have a good time enjoying the summer outdoors. That's it. I ain't got much more to say. We said it all on the show. Next week, it's TSV Roundup only, so we will bring you news of the week, news of the day from around the country. We will have some updates as far as the schedule goes coming around the 4th of July holiday, things like that, but we really shouldn't miss a beat. A little housekeeping. NAS Summit, you guys, those that know, and those that don't know, you're going to learn. Our NAS Summit, every year, we bring legislators, we bring industry professionals, leadership of those, CEOs, presidents of great organizations, nonprofits, agency partners, all these people come hang out with us a few days, have some great extracurriculars, in the evenings put on by our event team are just top notch. And then some great stuff at the end. Like go into the field, go in the water, and enjoy our host state's resources. This year, we are in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Early bird registration is now open. So log on to congressionalsportsmen.org. We'll put the link in the show notes. And, shame on me for not doing this from the beginning, but going forward, folks, there will be show notes, links in the show notes. So for this episode, we're going to give you a link to our policy briefing, our issue brief, bring you right to that. You can learn a little bit more on the topics that we're covering on these feature episodes. And then we'll drop the NAS registration link in the show notes too. So you can just one click go, get registered, get your ticket there, and join us in Baton Rouge from November 19th to the 22nd. I am going to correct, I think in prior shows I've talked about, I may have given the wrong date. So this is the correct date. Excuse me, my bad. November 19th to the 22nd. So hopefully if you've hung around long enough to listen to this out, you're getting valuable information. And so there you go. Check the show notes for the informational links and the event links. Share it with folks that are going to want to go and get in on that early bird registration. That's it. Thanks for tuning in. CSF is your inside connection to outdoor legislation. As always, thanks for hanging out with us. Stay cool out there in the heat. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.